So last week, well, or the week before that, before we left for the break, we talked about layout testing using a technique called snapshot testing, right? Where we replaced the browser, we removed that dependency by programmatically generating the DOM, right? We're using a tool for rendering the DOM, and then we would compare the snapshot that was actually rendered with an expected one, right? And so that's certainly a mechanism. An alternative way to do that would be to programmatically, retrieve the DOM elements, right, and verify that the DOM elements are actually there, right? And to see that if I add a new item, the item actually is added to the list, right? That if I pass in 4 items, that indeed there's 4 rows, right? That there are 4 buttons in each one, there are 4 titles that we should be able to, programmatically, retrieve this content from the DOM, right? So we would like to be able to, the unit, the element under test is isolated, that we can instantiate it with a known mocked test data, that we can retrieve the resulting DOM from that mock data that was rendered, and verify that the DOM elements actually are there. That if we interact with it by removing or adding or editing something, that as we interact with the DOM programmatically, that the DOM manipulates or re-renders correctly by either removing elements from the DOM or adding new elements to the DOM. So we can do that with Jest. So let's see how we could do that with Jest. Here's an example of a mocked piece of data. Notice that we have stored it in a dedicated file called quotes.mock.json. Right? And so this is a good practice, right, for your tests. That here you would have some representative data, presumably some data that looks very similar to what you would get from retrieving it from a server, right? Maybe it's even some snippet of data that you got from the server, but you're saving it here under in some mocked JSON data, which you can then use to instantiate, right, as an initial state of some element under test. Here's an example of a test that we are going to mock. Here we have the quotes. This is the new quotes implementation, not the stateful implementation, but the stateless implementation. Here we're loading the mocked data, plus the renderer that allows us to render the DOM programmatically, right, without the need of a browser. So here we're creating a new test called quote list renders correctly. And the way we're implementing it is that we use the test renderer.create to render the quotes, passing it, right, the quotes as an argument. See that? And no longer is the quotes going to go and fetch this data from some service, right? It's not going to need some network or whatnot. Instead, it's fully under our control. We pass it the quotes that we wanted to render, right? And so it's fully, we have control over the state of the quote. We can retrieve the JSON. We can still use the snapshot testing that we used last week, but I wanted to go on further than snapshot testing. From the tree, you can generate what's called a test instance, which I don't have a link. I don't have a line for this. I skipped a line. The test instance from that tree is going to give you an API that allows you to go into the DOM, right, into the generated DOM, and retrieve elements programmatically. Very much like jQuery, if you ever use jQuery, right? That you can go and fetch elements, right, in the DOM, and then create certain asserts and tests, right, that can testify that your DOM is working correctly. For instance, here we are we are retrieving elements, a particular element that has been strategically tagged with the class job title field. Right, so we have gone into the rendering, right, into the HTML, and strategically put certain classes in there, right, so that we can then test it adequately. Right, we can go in and say, okay, well, retrieve from me the job title field, and then we can ask ourselves, is there just one? There should be just one. Right? And how about the retrieve the button for creating a quote? There should be one. How about the update button? There should be only one. Right? And quotes rows, since we passed in the quotes which contain two quotes, since we passed in two quotes, an array, right? If we retrieve all the rows, well, there should be two. Right? There should be two of those, and we can retrieve also the title, right, from the editing title. There should be two delete buttons. There should be two select buttons. Right? So again, we can retrieve the elements from the DOM and then create all sorts of asserts, right, that verify that title field for editing, right? The value of that field should be J1. J1 because we instantiated it, the quote, right, with quotes at 0, and this is the one that's used to render the input field, the initial input field, and quote sub 0 has a title as J1. Right, so we want to make sure, did it render correctly? Did the DOM render correctly? So we can extract the value of the input field. We can check to see that buttons, the create buttons, is only one of those. In the update button, there's only one of those. The quote rows, there's two rows, two job titles, two delete buttons, and two select quotes. So we're verifying that the quotes actually work. And we can go a little further and click on the create button. Click on the create button. And after clicking on the create button, verify that there's 3 delete buttons and 3 select quotes that have been added correctly to the DOM, which is pretty cool.